Godzilla 1998 might not be the towering classic we expected, but it's packed with behind-the-scenes secrets and quirky facts that will totally change how you view this monster movie. From the casting choices to unexpected plot twists, here are 20 weird facts about Godzilla 1998 you probably didn't know. 1. The Godzilla design was initially kept a secret. When the 1998 Godzilla movie was being developed, the filmmakers kept the design of the titular monster a closely guarded secret. They wanted to surprise fans with something fresh, but they were also aware of the long history of Godzilla fans' strong opinions about the monster's appearance. The first glimpses of the creature in the film caused shock, with many fans complaining about its more reptilian design compared to previous versions. What's weird is that the Godzilla design was so drastically different from the traditional look that it polarized fans. The creature's body, posture, and movement were all designed to be more animalistic, deviating from the standard Godzilla traits. This design was meant to appeal to Western audiences and modernize the monster for a 1998 audience, but it also caused a significant divide between old-school fans and newcomers to the franchise. 2. Godzilla was originally supposed to be a female. In the early stages of the 1998 Godzilla film, the character was originally supposed to be a female. The filmmakers had discussions about portraying Godzilla as a more maternal creature, but they eventually decided against it. The female idea would have tied into the film's themes of reproduction, as Godzilla was depicted as being able to reproduce asexually by laying eggs. However, the decision to make Godzilla a male character changed the entire storyline, which also altered how the creature interacted with the human characters in the film. What's weird is that despite the change in gender, the female concept still influenced certain aspects of the film, particularly the scenes with Godzilla's nest and the hatchlings. This idea of Godzilla as a mother figure is something that has been explored in later Godzilla films, but it was discarded in favor of a more traditional approach to the character. 3. The movie was criticized for its lack of destruction. While the 1998 Godzilla was meant to be a blockbuster filled with massive destruction and epic battles, it received criticism for the lack of traditional kaiju action that fans of the franchise had come to expect. The monster, although large and menacing, didn't engage in the same kinds of chaotic battles with military forces or other monsters like its predecessors. Instead, most of the film focused on Godzilla running away from human forces and hiding in the shadows. What's weird is that the film marketed itself as a monster movie, but Godzilla spends a large chunk of the runtime avoiding conflict. Fans expecting the classic Godzilla versus another kaiju experience were disappointed by the lack of actual destruction. Instead, they were treated to a Godzilla trying to escape military efforts, which didn't live up to the high-octane, action-packed reputation of previous films in the franchise. 4. The sound design for Godzilla was created using real animal sounds. To create Godzilla's iconic roar, sound designers didn't rely on the typical monster sound effects. Instead, they used a mix of real animal sounds and creative techniques to craft something truly unique. The filmmakers combined recordings of various animals, such as elephants, lions, and whales, and then altered and manipulated these sounds in the studio to create Godzilla's deep, guttural roar. What's weird is that the sound designers went to extreme lengths to ensure the roar didn't resemble anything fans had heard before in the series. By using actual animal sounds, they gave Godzilla's roar a more organic and realistic feel, making it sound more like an actual living creature. The result was a roar that felt powerful and intimidating while still being original. The iconic roar became one of the defining aspects of the 1998 film, even though it was quite different from the traditional Godzilla roar that fans were used to. 5. Godzilla's role was originally the central focus of the film. In the original drafts of Godzilla 1998, the creature was not the central focus of the film. Instead, the movie was initially planned as more of an action-adventure film with a focus on the human characters and their efforts to contain the creature. Godzilla was envisioned as more of a looming presence, with the human characters taking center stage as the plot moved forward. What's weird is that the decision to make Godzilla the focal point of the film came later in development, as the filmmakers realized that the audience wanted to see more of the monster. The shift in focus resulted in more monster-centric scenes and ultimately led to Godzilla becoming the primary driver of the story. However, the film still maintained a heavy focus on the human characters, which created an odd balance between monster spectacle and human drama that some fans didn't find satisfying. 6. Godzilla's size was constantly changed during filming. One of the most noticeable changes in the 1998 Godzilla was its size, which was altered throughout the film's production. Initially, Godzilla was designed to be even larger than the final version, but due to limitations in visual effects and the desire to make the monster more agile, the filmmakers continuously adjusted its size. At one point, Godzilla was intended to be over 400 feet tall, but eventually it was scaled down to a more manageable 300 feet for easier movement and interaction with the human characters. What's weird is that despite these size changes, the creature's scale was still inconsistent throughout the film. Sometimes it appeared much smaller or larger depending on the scene, especially when interacting with buildings or vehicles. This lack of consistency in size led to some confusion among viewers, but it was a compromise to ensure the monster could be portrayed in more dynamic action scenes. 7. The movie featured an unconventional take on the military. Unlike previous Godzilla films, where military forces were portrayed as heroic and united in the fight against the monster, the 1998 version of Godzilla presented a much more divided and ineffective military response. In the film, the military is largely seen as incompetent and disorganized, unable to stop Godzilla or even get a coherent strategy together. What's weird is that, in most Godzilla films, the military is a central part of the story, and the film's portrayal of military incompetence was a drastic departure from the usual heroic portrayals. This satirical take on the military was intended to add humor and commentary on the overreach of military power, but it left some fans of the franchise feeling that the film had strayed too far from traditional Godzilla themes. It also shifted the focus more on the human characters, taking away from the usual monster versus military action. 8. Godzilla was originally meant to have a more humanoid form. The first concept art for the 1998 Godzilla featured a more humanoid creature with a broader chest, walking on two legs with a more upright posture. This design was much closer to the classic Godzilla, but with a greater emphasis on making the creature more agile. However, the filmmakers eventually decided to change the design to make Godzilla more animalistic and less anthropomorphic. What's weird is that the humanoid design was initially favored, because it allowed Godzilla to interact with its environment in a way that felt more natural. The decision to make Godzilla more like a large reptile resulted in a creature that was faster but less terrifying to some fans who were hoping for a traditional monster with a more terrifying, human-like presence. The final design was a mix of these elements, but the decision to drop the humanoid form left some fans disappointed by the changes. 9. The film was initially supposed to be a reboot of the franchise. The 1998 Godzilla was intended to be a complete reboot of the franchise, with the aim of creating a new Americanized version of the monster. The filmmakers wanted to start fresh, distancing themselves from the 1950s roots of the Japanese Godzilla and reimagining the monster for a new generation. The original script focused heavily on Godzilla's origins, explaining how the creature came to be through scientific experimentation. What's weird is that the reboot didn't keep any of the themes of nuclear disaster and human error that defined the original Japanese films. Instead, the monster was depicted as a more traditional creature that attacked New York City for no particular reason. The decision to stray from the original themes of Godzilla caused a backlash from fans who felt that the reboot missed the point of the character. 10. Godzilla's eggs were originally going to hatch into more monsters. In the original script for Godzilla 1998, the creature's eggs, which are discovered later in the film, were supposed to hatch into even more Godzilla-like monsters. These smaller monsters would have created a more direct sequel hook, setting up a larger battle for the future of the franchise. However, the idea was scrapped during production. What's weird is that the film's ending, which sees Godzilla's egg sacs destroyed, was altered at the last minute to give the movie a more definitive conclusion, without hinting at future sequels. The filmmakers feared that introducing more monsters would have diluted the focus on Godzilla and distracted from the emotional arc of the film. The idea of Godzilla reproducing in such a way was intended to add complexity to the monster, but in the final cut, the plot focused more on Godzilla as a solitary creature. This change ultimately paved the way for a different direction in the film's follow-up. 11. The director wasn't a fan of Godzilla before the film. Director Roland Emmerich, known for his work on disaster films like Independence Day, was initially not a fan of Godzilla. Before being hired for the 1998 movie, Emmerich was unfamiliar with the character's history and legacy in Japanese cinema. In fact, he didn't even grow up watching the Godzilla films. What's weird is that Emmerich's lack of attachment to the original Godzilla led him to make bold creative decisions, such as redesigning the monster and focusing more on action. His approach to the film was heavily influenced by American blockbuster films and disaster movies, rather than the deep cultural roots of Godzilla. While this gave the film a distinctly westernized feel, it alienated many longtime fans who felt the essence of the character was lost. Emmerich's unfamiliarity with the franchise resulted in a film that, for better or worse, was a radical departure from the Godzilla mythology. 12. The movie was meant to be a satirical take on giant monster films. Though Godzilla 1998 was marketed as a serious reboot of the franchise, the filmmakers originally intended it to be a satirical take on giant monster films. The film's portrayal of Godzilla was meant to poke fun at the genre, blending elements of traditional kaiju films with American-style action and humor. The idea was to create a movie that felt both like a tribute to giant monster films and a playful parody of them. What's weird is that this satirical tone didn't come through as clearly in the final product, and many viewers took the film more seriously than it was originally intended. While there are moments of humor in the film, especially with the character of Matthew Broderick's scientist Nick Tatopoulos, the overall tone didn't capture the self-aware parody that the filmmakers had envisioned. The attempt at satire ended up being lost in translation, leaving a more straightforward action film than expected. 13. Godzilla was initially only supposed to appear for a few minutes. Originally, Godzilla was only supposed to appear for a brief moment in the film. The initial concept had the creature as a looming presence, with most of the story focusing on the human characters trying to deal with the aftermath of Godzilla's initial attack. What's weird is that the decision to make Godzilla a more central figure in the film came late in the production process. The filmmakers realized that audiences wouldn't accept a Godzilla movie without seeing the creature in full action. As a result, the film's final script was rewritten to include more scenes of Godzilla, including its rampage through New York City. This late shift in focus led to changes in the packing and tone of the film, making it more monster-centric than initially planned. While Godzilla's larger role in the film was a fan-pleaser, it also left the movie with a more uneven balance between monster action and human drama. 14. Godzilla's destruction was more minimal than expected. For a movie that promised epic monster destruction, Godzilla 1998 didn't deliver as much widespread chaos as fans anticipated. The film featured Godzilla smashing through buildings and creating havoc in New York City, but the monster's overall level of destruction was much less than previous Godzilla films. The creature didn't engage in full-scale city-destroying battles, as was typical in earlier entries in the franchise. What's weird is that the movie, despite being a giant monster film, didn't have the monster wreaking havoc in the same way fans were used to. The 1998 version of Godzilla spent much of its screen time running and hiding, rather than engaging in extended rampages. This less aggressive version of Godzilla created a major disconnect, with fans who were expecting the monster to live up to its legacy of colossal destruction. While the film featured plenty of action, it didn't deliver the level of chaos that the Godzilla name usually promised. 15. The Godzilla toy line was more successful than the movie. While Godzilla 1998 was a commercial success, its toy line actually outperformed the film at the box office. The movie's marketing department heavily pushed a line of action figures, plush toys, and other merchandise, hoping to capitalize on the movie's potential. What's weird is that the toys became a massive hit, even surpassing the film's commercial earnings in some markets. The success of the toys was fueled by their appeal to children, who loved the idea of a giant, action-packed Godzilla to play with. However, the film itself was divisive, with many fans criticizing the changes to the Godzilla character and its more action-driven focus. The toy line, however, capitalized on the excitement surrounding the film's visual effects and the appeal of the monster, leading to Godzilla toys being some of the most successful merchandise items in 1998. This paradox between the film's reception and the toy line's popularity is one of the oddest results of the movie's release. 16. The film's director, Roland Emmerich, had little knowledge of Godzilla's legacy. Roland Emmerich, the director of the 1998 Godzilla, was not a fan of the original Godzilla films. In fact, before taking on the project, Emmerich had very little knowledge of Godzilla's history and cultural significance in Japan. He was more familiar with disaster movies and wanted to give Godzilla a modern, westernized spin, which meant focusing more on action than the traditional kaiju themes of nuclear disaster and human error. What's weird is that Emmerich's lack of connection to the original films led to a movie that didn't fully embrace the deeper themes of the Godzilla franchise. While this gave the film a fresh take, it also alienated many hardcore fans who expected a more faithful homage to the classic Japanese Godzilla movies. Emmerich's disinterest in the creature's history ultimately resulted in a film that felt more like a generic monster flick than a true Godzilla film. 17. The 1998 Godzilla was inspired by Jurassic Park. One of the major influences on the design of the 1998 Godzilla was Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park, 1993. The filmmakers wanted to create a Godzilla that felt more like a real animal than the previous version, which was often portrayed as a creature with a somewhat human-like presence. They drew inspiration from Jurassic Park's groundbreaking visual effects and realistic dinosaur designs to make Godzilla's movements and behavior more lifelike. What's weird is that the idea of making Godzilla resemble a giant more realistic reptile took away from the traditional supernatural essence of the creature. The filmmakers focused on portraying Godzilla as an animal acting on instinct, which differed from the monster's symbolic role in the earlier films. The Jurassic Park-inspired design made Godzilla more relatable as a living creature, but also stripped away the more fantastical qualities that defined the original kaiju. 18. Godzilla's DNA was borrowed from multiple creatures. The 1998 Godzilla design wasn't just based on a single species, it was a mix of several different creatures. The filmmakers combined the features of a reptile, bird, and amphibian to create a more versatile, agile monster. They drew inspiration from lizards for Godzilla's scaly skin and long tail, while incorporating the hind legs of birds to give the creature speed and mobility. The creature's posture and stance also borrowed elements from crocodiles and iguanas. What's weird is that while this mix of animal traits made the creature more dynamic and believable in motion, it also left the film, Godzilla, looking very different from its classic predecessors. Traditional Godzilla fans were disappointed by the creature's lack of recognizable traits, like its characteristic dorsal fins and massive, heavy stance. The decision to borrow from multiple creatures gave Godzilla a new identity, but also made it feel like a departure from the original kaiju. 19. The special effects team used miniature models for destruction. Although Godzilla 1998 is remembered for its groundbreaking CGI effects, a significant amount of the destruction was created using traditional miniature models. The filmmakers used scale models of New York City and other structures to create the appearance of Godzilla stomping through the city. These models were painstakingly built and then destroyed using a mix of practical effects and digital enhancement. What's weird is that despite the film being known for its reliance on CGI for Godzilla's design, much of the film's destruction still came from physical models. The use of miniatures added a tactile, physical element to the destruction, making it feel more real and grounded, even though the Godzilla design was computer-generated. The combination of practical models and CGI allowed the filmmakers to blend old-school techniques with new technology, creating a unique visual experience that still holds up in certain scenes today. 20. The 1998 Godzilla inspired a video game spin-off. Despite the mixed reception of the 1998 Godzilla movie, it inspired an entire video game spin-off that was quite popular in its own right. The game, titled Godzilla, the game 1998, was released for the Nintendo 64 and allowed players to control Godzilla as they rampaged through cities and battled other monsters. What's weird is that the video game version of Godzilla, while based on the movie's design, actually took the creature's powers and abilities much more seriously. In the game, Godzilla had to fight against other creatures and complete missions, which made the character feel more in line with traditional Godzilla films. The game was fun and featured a lot of destructive action, but it didn't capture the same tone of the film. Fans of the game enjoyed it, and it became a cult classic, offering an alternative way to enjoy the 1998 Godzilla's destructive antics outside the film.